2018 when I visited the shrine of Padre Pio in Pietrelcina, Italy. I went to the shrine alone, not knowing any Italian language. I boarded the bus but with confidence that I will reach the shrine without any problem. I was a little bit afraid of traveling alone, knowing that there is a language difficulty, but all the Italians I have met were all kind and friendly. The sanctuary of Padre Pio of Pietrelcina is far from Rome, where I stayed is located in San Giovanni Rotondo, province of Foggia, Italy. Padre Pio, also known as Saint Pius of Pietrelcina, was born on May 25, 1887 and died on September 23, 1968. He was an Italian Franciscan Capuchin, friar, priest, stigmatist, and also a mystic. He was born Francesco Forgione. He was given the name of Pius or Pio in Italian when he joined the order of Friars Minor Capuchin. Padre Pio became famous for exhibiting stigmata for most of his life, and was both beatified in 1999 and canonized in 2002 by Pope John Paul II. Padre Pio's parents were Maria Giuseppa D'Annunzio and Grazio Mario Forgione, were peasant farmers. He was baptized in the nearby Santa Anna Chapel, which stands upon the walls of a castle. He later served as an altar boy in this same chapel. He had an older brother, Michele, and 3 younger sisters, Felicita, Pellegrina, and Grazia, who also become a Brigittine nun. By the time Padre Pio was 5 years old, he had already made the decision to dedicate his entire life to God. Pietrelcina was a town where feast days of saints were celebrated throughout the year, and the Forgione family was deeply religious. They attended Mass daily, prayed the Rosary nightly, and abstained from meat 3 days a week in honor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. As a young age he already experienced heavenly visions. Francesco, his baptismal name, was said to have been drawn to the life of a friar after listening to a young Capuchin who was in the countryside seeking donations. When Francesco expressed his desire to his parents, they made a trip to Morcone, a community 13 miles north of Pietrelcina, to find out if their son was eligible to enter the order. The friars there informed them that they were interested in accepting Francesco into their community, but he needed to be better educated. At the age of 15, he entered the novitiate of the Capuchin friars at Morcone. On January 22, he took the Franciscan habit and the name of Friar Pio, in honor of Pope Pius I, whose relic is preserved in the Santa Anna Chapel in Pietrelcina. He then took the simple vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Commencing his 7-year study for the priesthood, Padre Pio traveled to the friary of Saint Francis of Assisi in Umbria. At 17, he fell ill, complaining of loss of appetite, insomnia, exhaustion, fainting spells, and migraines. He vomited frequently and could digest only milk and cheese. Religious devotees point to this time as being that at which inexplicable phenomena allegedly began to occur. During prayers, for example, Padre Pio appeared to others to be in a stupor, as if he were absent. One of Pio's fellow friars later claimed to have seen him in ecstasy, and allegedly levitating above the ground. In June 1905, Padre Pio's health worsened to such an extent that his superiors decided to send him to a mountain convent, in the hope that the change of air would do him good. This had little impact, however, and doctors advised that he return home. Even there his health failed to improve. Despite this, he still made his solemn profession on January 27, 1907. Padre Pio, when he celebrate a mass, it would often last hours, as the mystic received visions and experienced sufferings. Note the coverings worn on his hands to hide his stigmata. His famous quote, "Pray, hope, and don't worry." He directed Christians to recognize God in all things and to desire above all things to do the will of God. After World War II, people started rebuilding their lives and they began to see in Padre Pio as a symbol of hope. Those close to him attest that he began to manifest several spiritual gifts, including the gifts of healing, bilocation, levitation, prophecy, miracles, extraordinary abstinence from both sleep and nourishment. One account states that Padre Agostino recorded one instance in which Padre Pio was able to subsist for at least 20 days at Verafino on only the Holy Eucharist without any other nourishment. He also had the ability to read hearts, the gift of tongues, the gift of conversions, and pleasant-smelling wounds. Padre Pio increasingly became well known among the wider populace. He became a spiritual director, and developed 5 rules for spiritual growth: weekly confession, daily communion, spiritual reading, meditation, and examination of conscience. By 1925, Padre Pio had converted an old convent building into a medical clinic with a few beds intended primarily for people in extreme need. In 1940, a committee was set up to establish a bigger clinic and donations started to be made. Construction began in 1947. Later, some of Father Pio's detractors have subsequently suggested there had been misappropriation of funds, and so there was an investigation and the Vatican initially imposed severe sanctions on Padre Pio in the 1920 to reduce publicity about him. It forbade him from saying Mass in public, blessing people, answering letters, showing his stigmata publicly, and communicating with Padre Benedetto, his spiritual director. Based on Pio's correspondence, even early in his priesthood he experienced less obvious indications of the visible stigmata, bodily marks, pain, and bleeding in locations supposedly corresponding to the crucifixion wounds of Jesus Christ. In a 1911 letter, he wrote to his spiritual advisor Padre Benedetto from San Marco in Lamis, describing something he had been apparently experiencing for a year. He said, "Last night something happened which I can neither explain nor understand. In the middle of the palms of my hands a red mark appeared, about the size of a penny, accompanied by acute pain in the middle of the red marks. The pain was more pronounced in the middle of the left hand, so much so that I can still feel it. Also under my feet I can feel some pain." Already in a letter dated March 21, 1912, to his spiritual companion and confessor, Father Agostino, Padre Pio wrote of his devotion to the mystical body of Christ and the intuition that he, Padre Pio, one day himself would bear the stigmata of Christ. His close friend Padre Agostino wrote in 1915, asking specific questions, such as when he first experienced visions, whether he had been granted the stigmata, and whether he felt the pains of the Passion of Christ, namely the crowning of thorns and the scourging. Padre Pio replied that he had been favored with visions since his novitiate period. Although he had been granted the stigmata, he had been so terrified by the phenomenon he begged the Lord to withdraw them. He wrote that he did not wish the pain to be removed, only the visible wounds, since he considered them to be an indescribable and almost unbearable humiliation. On September 20, 1918, while hearing confessions, Padre Pio claimed to have had a reappearance of the physical occurrence of the stigmata. The phenomenon was reported to have continued for 50 years, until the end of his life. The blood flowing from the stigmata purportedly smelled of perfume or flowers. He reported to Agostino that the pain remained and was more acute on specific days and under certain circumstances. He also said that he was suffering the pain of the crown of thorns and the scourging. He did not define the frequency of these occurrences but said that he had been suffering from them at least once weekly for some years. Though Padre Pio said he would have preferred to suffer in secret, by early 1919, news had begun to spread. Padre Pio often wore red mittens or black coverings on his hands and feet as he was embarrassed by the marks. In the 1999 book, Padre Pio, The Wonder Worker, a segment by Irish priest Malachi Gerard Carroll describes the story of Gemma de Giorgi, a Sicilian girl whose blindness was believed to have been cured during a visit to Padre Pio. Gemma, who was brought to San Giovanni Rotondo in 1947 by her grandmother, was born without pupils. During her trip to see Padre Pio, the little girl began to see objects, including a steamboat and the sea. Gemma's grandmother did not believe the child had been healed. After Gemma forgot to ask Padre Pio for grace during her confession, her grandmother implored the priest to ask God to restore her sight. Padre Pio told her, "The child must not weep and neither must you, for the child sees and you know she sees." On the day of Padre Pio's death, mystic and servant of God Maria Esperanza de Bianchini from Venezuela reported that he appeared to her in a vision and said, "I have come to say goodbye. My time has come. It is your turn." Her husband saw his wife's face transfigured into that of Padre Pio. On the following day, they learned that Padre Pio had died. Witnesses say they later saw Esperanza levitating during Mass and engaging in bilocation. Padre Domenico de Assis, a fellow Capuchin stigmatist, reported that on September 22, 1968, he saw Padre Pio kneeling in prayer before the Holy Face of Manopello, although it was known that Padre Pio had not left his room. Padre Pio died in 1968 at the age of 81. His health deteriorated in the 1960s, but he continued his spiritual works. On September 21, 1968, the day after the 50th anniversary of his receiving the stigmata, Padre Pio felt great fatigue. The next day, on September 22, 1968, he was supposed to offer a solemn Mass, but feeling weak, he asked his superior if he might say a low Mass instead, as he had done daily for years. Due to a large number of pilgrims present for the Mass, Padre Pio's superior decided the solemn Mass must proceed. Padre Pio carried out his duties but appeared extremely weak and frail. His voice was weak, and, after the Mass had concluded, he nearly collapsed while walking down the altar steps. He needed help from his Capuchin brothers. This was his last celebration of the Mass. Early in the morning of September 23, 1968, Padre Pio made his last confession and renewed his Franciscan vows. As was customary, he had his rosary in his hands, though he did not have the strength to say the Hail Marys aloud. Till the end, he repeated the words Jesu, Maria, Jesus, Mary. At around 2:30 a.m., he said, "I see two mothers taken to mean his mother and Mary." At 2:30 a.m. he died in his cell in San Giovanni Rotondo. With his last breath he whispered, "Maria."